And we'll see the Chancellor, Nigel Lawson, making his traditional appearance before the photographers outside number 11, and we'll hear from the city. We'll be bringing you instant analysis from economics experts and from industry. To explain the Chancellor's measures, which, according to some predictions, might be fairly complicated, we have the ever-present computer stored with a variety of graphics. For example, there'll be analysis graphics to tell you if you're better or worse off. It seems safe to predict that the drinks bill will probably not be any lower after today's speech by the Chancellor. And soon after the speech is over, we'll be bringing you a full rundown of all the new measures with reports from our economics and political staff in 60 minutes. And we'll also have reaction from political leaders and from your own regions. That's the 60 Minutes budget special beginning at 3 o'clock.
Oh, that's just over 2 hours away because I make it coming up to 5 to 1.
That means it's time for another kind of forecasting on the weather with Michael Fish.
Good afternoon to you. Well, no tax on the weather, at least not yet.
At 3 o'clock, Budget 84, a 60-minute special. Analysis from economists and accountants, the reactions in Parliament with leading politicians, the city's view from the stock exchange, the effect on industry, comment from the West Midlands, and the traditional victims, the motorists, and of course, the smokers and the drinkers. And at 3:15, BBC CFAX with the details and updates of the speech on page 101. Budget 84, a 60-minute special at 3 o'clock this afternoon.
And this is BBC One.
Hello and welcome to Pell Mill at 1, and will you say hello straight away to our star guest today, Mariah Aitken.
Ends our Cheltenham coverage on BBC One for the day, but coverage continues straight away on BBC Two. So, join us on 2.
This afternoon's children's programmes can be seen at their usual times over on BBC Two following the racing, as we now on 1 concentrate on Budget 84.
Good afternoon and welcome to the 60 Minutes budget special. Just after 3 o'clock and in a bit over half an hour from now we'll be hearing the first budget of this new Parliament from the man who took over from Sir Geoffrey Howe as Chancellor after the June election, Nigel Lawson. If you haven't been down to London recently or seen the Palace of Westminster, it may come as a bit of a surprise. Big Ben on the left is in bandages while they clean it up. It was looking like a sort of Middle Ages fortification until a few months ago. They've begun to remove some of the packaging now. But anyway, down there in the House of Commons, the chamber's already packed. MPs, many of whom were up all night anyway, crammed into every aisle and on the steps, particularly on the government side. Of course, there are many more government MPs than opposition, and they're waiting for Prime Minister's questions, first of all, the normal parliamentary business, and then for the budget statement. Outside number 11 Downing Street, next door to number 10, the home of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Photographers waiting there in the cold afternoon air of this March day to catch the traditional picture that they can almost take in their sleep by now of the Chancellor coming out of the doorway and holding his battered Gladstone budget box up in the air. His children watching from the top of number 11 there to catch a sight of the photographers. We'll be back there when he comes down the steps of number 11 into his car and off on his journey to the House of Commons. And we're in the city. The tower you recognise, the modern buildings around it that now constitute the City of London, some of them rather less beautiful than the buildings that were there before. And there, dealers and analysts have spent many weeks poring over the possible courses the Chancellor may set today. working out how they'd be affected by them. And now today they wait with their calculators and their computers and their ready reckoners, earning their honest bob, to see what real effect the Chancellor's proposals will have on the pound sterling and more particularly on the prospects of business, companies and industry in Britain. Now later on this afternoon we'll be hearing from this building you may have seen before, the Aston Science Park, one of those areas where new or high tech is being encouraged, where people see the future all in terms of computers and electronics. What effect do they think this budget may have on that future and on jobs at the turn of the century, but also, more important perhaps for many people, what effect is it going to have in that area of the West Midlands on immediate prospects for growth and employment? And then, as ever, we're down at the Old Bull and Bush. Well, it's not actually the Old Bull and Bush, and I won't give its name, but it's a London pub where drinkers and smokers, on whom the Chancellor's malevolent eye always falls, will be hearing their reaction to news that may well be worse for the beer drinkers there in the picture than for the wine drinkers, if the reports about this budget are correct. And from the petrol pumps, another place where prices tend to go up with a leap on budget day, we'll be no doubt hearing a few motorists' grumblings as well later on. Well, the answers to these questions are at present known only to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, to the members of the Cabinet who heard them this morning, to his close advisers in the Treasury, as we wait for Nigel Lawson to come down on this, his big day, his first budget. And with his wife, Therese, and an advisor behind, comes down the steps of number 11 and goes out to face the waiting crowd. And it's a big day for him, a man who began his political life as a journalist, political journalist, pausing for the first time for a snap.
Okay. Okay.
Mr. Lawson is no stranger to the Treasury. Mrs. Thatcher put him in as financial secretary at the beginning of the Conservative government in 1979 till 81, and he worked very hard on the underlying financial strategy that she's followed since then.
Chancellor!
Giving a wave to his children above. Mark Lennox Boyd, his parliamentary private secretary on the left there with spectacles.
This way, sir. Chancellor, just this way, sir.
Well, there's a lot of curiosity about what he's got in that box. The work's been going on it, of course, for many, many weeks now, with the Treasury officials, with the computers hard at work, with political pressures, with pressures from industrialists and trade unionists about what he should have written in that speech. He has a reputation for being a radical. Many years ago, when he worked on the Sunday Telegraph, he wrote that Selwyn Lloyd, when he became Chancellor, should recast the whole structure of the tax system, but he may find that as Chancellor, that's perhaps rather easier said than done. His driver, who drove him when he was at the Ministry of Energy and stayed with him when he became Chancellor, goes around the other side, and they start off on this very brief journey down Downing Street, into Parliament Street,
Can you just
and
move
to
for
the
a
House
second,
of
please?
Commons.
Thank you. Cheers. Sorry about that. Thanks very much.
Well, there are people who say that
It's
this
all right.
is no
Thank you very
longer
much,
a
yeah.
great event, but I rank it pretty much along Derby Day and other great British events as something which won't go away, even though it's true that we hear a lot more about what Nigel Lawson is planning than we would have done 20 or 25 years ago from a Chancellor. Nevertheless, this is his big day, the car turning past the Cenotaph there. This is his big day because it's the one chance when everybody's listening to what he says about the way the economy is going. And even if it doesn't hold any amazing surprises, it sets the tone for the Treasury's view of the economy and the state of the economy over the coming year. And though we've been told it's going to be a so-called neutral budget, not giving any boost to the economy, there's a great deal of interest to see whether he uses it to make the sort of tax changes that he's talked about many times in the past. Well, that journey is soon over. He turns into New Palace Yard to the members' entrance to the House of Commons, and from there makes his way into the chamber and sits waiting for other business to come to an end. Incidentally, instead of rising to make his budget statement at 3:30, as he'd hoped, the Chancellor is going to be a bit delayed this afternoon. Once again, a backbencher has used the procedure to win a 10-minute debate before the Chancellor begins. You, after all, get your biggest audience of your life in Parliament on Budget Day if you can catch that 10-minute bill opportunity. Now, when the Chancellor does begin, we'll bring you the key extracts from his speech live, of course. We'll analyse what it is he's suggesting. We'll look at what his strategy appears to be. And helping us do that, student of economics, Peter Oppenheimer, student or fellow of Christ Church, Oxford. We also have with us Philip Hardman, chartered accountant and partner in Thornton Baker, who's going to unravel the mysteries of the Chancellor's taxation proposals for people and business, who's incidentally brought with him an abacus, which he swears is faster than the pocket calculator, though I don't myself believe he can use it, but we'll see. And also with us Sir Patrick Meany. He's in a new guise now. He's changed jobs. He's chairman of the Rank organisation, and from next month is deputy chairman of the Midland Bank. And he's here to give a businessman's view of the budget. He's on the Council of the Confederation of British Industry. We had invited Mr. Len Murray to take part in this programme to speak for the trade union movement as General Secretary of the TUC, but as some of you may know, he declined to take part. Sir Robin Day will be here, discovering the first political reactions to the budget statement.
Yes, I'm taking part all right. Mr. Lawson's first budget is being awaited with some trepidation on the government benches because they wonder whether it'll mark the end of an uneasy patch, as they see it, for Mrs. Thatcher and her colleagues during recent months, or will it, as some nervous Tories think, make things worse? Perhaps if Mr. Lawson's tax reforms strike at some cherished items in the Tory tradition, such as tax relief on mortgage loans.
And because these budget measures are very complicated, and because the speech goes on for an hour or an hour and a half perhaps, and because, well, I hope those of you who are watching now will stay watching, but perhaps part of your family has not yet arrived home, what we'll be doing during the afternoon is summarising the measures the Chancellor's announced and analysing them as we go along. And Richard Whitmore will be helping us during the afternoon doing that. Richard.
Yes, indeed. In a moment, with the help of the BBC's computer and the researchers of the Institute for Fiscal Studies, I'll be trying to forecast some of the most likely proposals the Chancellor will put forward today and how they will affect us all. I'll be bringing you the main budget news as the speech unfolds and a full summary of all the key budget proposals at 5:40 in the normal early evening edition of 60 Minutes. Meantime, back to David.
Well, we were saying earlier on, as he was leaving number 11, that there is a great deal of interest in now.
Lower than now.
Well, now that's your figure, 3 million. Have you projected that figure further ahead and across the next few years?
Yeah, on our estimates over the next 5 years, I don't think that they will be able to fight the next election on a figure lower than 3 million. It's likely to be 3 to 3.5 million out of work.
Something that, of course, absorbs the city is the current state of interest rates. Now, there has been some movement, hasn't there, here recently?
Yes, at the end of 83, bank base rates were down to 9%. Recently, Barclays Bank lowered theirs to 8.75%, but we don't think that that will be sustainable on unchanged policies. We would expect at the end of 84, base rates to have gone up to 9.5%.
Now, finally, we've heard a lot about this being a boring budget, and all budgets, as we know, are very well leaked these days. Is this going to be a boring budget?
I don't think this Chancellor's capable of giving us a boring budget. I'm sure he'd love to pull 1 or 2 rabbits out of the hat, a surprise or 2. The problem is he doesn't have much room for manoeuvre.
Paul Neild, thanks very much. Now back to you, David, in the studio.
Nick Clark reporting there from the Stock Exchange. And if Paul Neild's overall assessment is right, the Chancellor certainly doesn't have much room for manoeuvre to make large tax concessions, either on personal taxation or in the kind of help for industry that he's been lobbied for. And he has been lobbied pretty hard recently, either to reduce the tax burden on people or to cut from the CBI the national insurance surcharge that industry pays.